What's going on, guys? It is Rodge. Welcome back to another video. Today's video, I'm going to be talking about why I think Jimmie Johnson is the NASCAR Cup Series GOAT. So recently I put out a list on my Twitter, not recently, but like a couple of months ago, and it was a top 25 NASCAR Cup Series driver of all time list, and it had like 500 likes, but it also had 300 comments. So you kind of know where I'm going here. I had Jimmie Johnson at number one. And a lot of people in the comments seem to not think so. People thought Petty, people thought Gordon, people thought Earnhardt, mainly Gordon. The Gordon and Jimmie debate has always been kind of a big thing. But today I'm going to be showing you guys, or talking to you guys, about why I think Jimmie is the greatest of all time. Why I have him above Gordon, why I have him above Earnhardt, why I have him above Petty, Pearson, and the rest of the drivers in NASCAR Cup Series history. So before I get into it a little more in depth, I'm going to be talking about my GOAT criteria. What I value in a GOAT debate. Well, number one would be accolades. So championships, wins, crown jewel wins, things like that. Two would be field of competitiveness or era. It's no question the modern era is more competitive and tough to win in than the era in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s. I believe the mid-2000s to mid-2010s is the most competitive era in NASCAR Cup Series history. You had the most future Hall of Famers in that era racing against each other every single weekend. Third would be dominance. Jimmie is an extremely dominant driver, but also is Jeff and Petty and Earnhardt, which is what I'll get to in a second. Peak years. Drivers at their peak. Gordon has some insane peak years. So does Petty. So does Earnhardt. So does Jimmie. And longevity. I think all four of the drivers that we have here is really, really good in longevity. I think Petty might be the weakest, maybe Johnson being the weakest as well. But those would be my five little bulletin points for criteria for what I think a GOAT debate should be. So before I get in a little bit more depth, just like I said, I'm sorry for waiting. I'm going to go over the statistics or career statistics and accomplishments for the three drivers that I have in the GOAT debate. Newsflash, I do not have Richard Petty in the GOAT debate. I believe he raced against a very non-competitive field. So there was literally only 2 or 3 cars on the lead lap when he was racing back then. And also to go on top of that, he had seasons where NASCAR had over 60 races on the schedule. So he can stat pad his top 5s, his top 10s, and his wins. The fact that he actually only had 7 championships back then in that era is actually kind of depressing. I would have thought he had more than that, considering how weak the field was back then. I think winning 7 championships in the 90s and especially in the 2000s and 2010s is way more impressive than winning championships in the 70s and 60s, where there were 60 races on the schedule. Not everyone ran the full series. And also for the Richard Petty debate, David Pearson was better than Petty. He beat him head to head, and all the seasons where Pearson ran full time, he beat Petty in points and won the championships over Petty. Petty could have had 10 championships if it weren't for David Pearson, meaning he wasn't the best driver in that era. He was getting beat by people, which is what Jimmie Johnson wasn't really doing during his dominant years. He wasn't really being beat by people head to head. He had the most wins in his era. And he was the most consistent driver in his years as well. Like, there were rarely seasons. I don't think from 2002 to 2016, he had one season where he finished top 10 or finished outside the top 10 in points in a Winston Cup format or a playoff format. Like, it didn't matter. Jimmie was going to finish top 10. And from 2002 to 2013, he was top 5 in basically every single one of those seasons, besides maybe 1 or 2 of them. That's just nuts to think about, especially in an era which, what I'll get to in a second, has the most future Hall of Fame drivers. That is a ridiculous prime to have. So we'll start off. Jimmie Johnson has 700 Cup Series starts, 83 wins, 233 top 5s, 375 top 10s, 36 poles, 18,941 laps led, a 13.5 average finish, 7 championships, 4 All-Star wins, 4 Coke 600 wins, 4 Brickyard 400 wins, 2 Daytona 500 wins, and 2 Southern 500 wins. And he also had 11 wins at Dover, 9 wins in Martinsville, 8 wins at Charlotte, and 7 wins at Texas. Jeff Gordon had 805 starts, which is about 100 more than Jimmie, 93 wins, which is only 10 more than Jimmie, 325 top 5s, 477 top 10s, 81 poles, 24,936 laps led, a 12.5 average finish, which is lower than Jimmie's, 4 championships, 3 Daytona 500s, 5 Brickyard 400s, 6 Southern 500s, 3 Coke 600s, and is a 3-time All-Star winner. He was also a Rookie of the Year, unlike Jimmie, and has 7 wins in Martinsville. For Dale Earnhardt, he has 676 starts, 76 wins, 281 top 5s, 428 top 10s, 22 poles, 25,714 laps led, an 11.1 average finish, 7 championships, a Daytona 500, a Brickyard 400, granted he didn't have the chance to run many of them, and 3 Southern 500s, 3 Coke 600s, a 1979 Rookie of the Year, 10 wins at Talladega, 9 wins at Bristol, 9 wins in Atlanta, and 9 wins in Darlington. Now let's get into why I think Jimmie Johnson is the GOAT. 1, championship count. He's tied with the most. He has 7 championships, just like Richard Petty and just like Dale Earnhardt. Jeff Gordon only has 4. Jeff Gordon did not win any championships in the playoff format. Jimmie won all 7 of his championships in the playoff format because he only did 2 seasons without a playoff format. Dale and Petty had the Winston Cup format. There are going to be people in the comments that say, well, Jeff would have won 7 championships. He would have won 2004, 2007, and 2014 in the Winston Cup era. Newsflash, we're not in the Winston Cup era. Drivers will drive the playoff system completely differently in a playoff system. Not to mention, Jimmie has won championships in more different playoff systems than Jeff has. Jeff won only in the Winston Cup format. Jimmie won in a 10-man chase, a 12-man chase, a 13 race chase format, or not 13 driver chase format, and he won in the knockout style, which is, I think, the hardest playoff system to win championships underneath. Another reason why I think Jimmie Johnson is the GOAT is he won 5 championships in a row. From 2006 to 2010 in the same format, actually different formats because technically they increased the chase field. He won 5 consecutive championships. To mention, no other driver has repeated once. No driver has won back-to-back championships since the playoff format has been introduced in 2004. Besides Jimmie Johnson, who won 5 of them in a row. Next is dominance in the modern era, the most competitive field. This is a list of drivers that Jimmie Johnson was beating for championships and who Jimmie Johnson was beating on a weekly basis. Jeff Gordon, future Hall of Famer. Tony Stewart, future Hall of Famer. Kevin Harvick, or not future Hall of Famers, but they're Hall of Famers. Kevin Harvick, Hall of Famer. Kyle Busch, Hall of Famer. Kurt Busch, Hall of Famer. Denny Hamlin, Hall of Famer. Brad Keselowski, Hall of Famer. Joey Logano, Hall of Famer. Martin Truex Jr., Hall of Famer. Carl Edwards, Hall of Famer. Greg Biffle's a Hall of Famer. Dale Earnhardt Jr. is a Hall of Famer. Casey Kane's a notable win. Ryan Newman could be in the Hall of Fame. Matt Kenseth's a Hall of Famer. Jeff Burton's a Hall of Famer. Mark Martin is a Hall of Famer. And there's even more. Jimmie was beating these guys on a week-to-week basis. Another reason why I have Jimmie as the GOAT, he has like insane clutch performances in the playoffs. Jeff Gordon had one of the most consistent seasons in NASCAR Cup Series history in 2007. He scored 30 top 10s in a 36 race format. He could not touch Jimmie in the playoffs. Jimmie won 5 out of 10 chase races. Jeff had like a 4th or 5th average finish in those 10 races. Jimmie one-upped him and won the championship. He straight up outdueled Jeff, who had the most consistent season in NASCAR Cup Series history up to that point, or in modern history up to that point. He was nuts that year. Jimmie still beat him. It did not matter. 2016, Jimmie's very inconsistent in 2016. Wins the first round of 12 race, wins the first round of 8 race, wins the championship. He's extremely clutch. He's one of the most clutch drivers in NASCAR history. Probably the most clutch driver in NASCAR Cup Series history. Another reason why I have Jimmie as the GOAT is the adaptation to multiple different cars and playoff formats. He won a championship in 3 different cars, and he won a championship in 3 different playoff formats. He won a championship, I think 2006 is where they had a 10-man chase format. He won a championship in 2013, which had a 13-man chase format. And he won a championship in 2016, which had a 16-driver knockout elimination format, the one that we have today. And he won a championship in the Gen 6. He won a championship in the car tomorrow with a wing. He won a championship in the first era of the Gen 6, which is the high horsepower era. And he won a championship in the lower horsepower era of the Gen 6, which is 2016, which was like the low downforce 750 horsepower thing. And he was good at basically every single racetrack on the schedule at that point in his career too. So now that I've read those accolades, now what are people gonna say? You know, Jeff was a more consistent driver. He was. Jeff has better longevity. Jeff did have better longevity. He was a championship threat from his sophomore year in NASCAR all the way until his last season in NASCAR. Jeff was a more consistent driver. He consistently had seasons where he was actually better than Jimmie. And to mention Jeff's average finish being a 12.5, considering he had 805 Cup starts, is ridiculous. And also, there are going to be people in the comments that don't value Jimmie's championships like I value Jimmie's championships, which I think is a fair assessment. But still, I think Jimmie's championships were actually harder to win, considering that nobody else went back-to-back in championships besides Jimmie, who won 5 championships in a row in a harder era and in a harder playoff system than what Jeff had. And as for Dale, I think Dale might have been the GOAT, maybe if he raced 1 or 2 more years, but his career was unfortunately ended short. Even though it wasn't really short, he still raced, 22 years? He has almost the same amount of starts as Jimmie. If you take away Jimmie's part-time starts in like 2001 and the starts after 2020, they have roughly the same amount of starts. And Jimmie beats him in almost every single category. Besides lap sled and average finish, I guess. But Dale had an 11.1 average finish, which I think is like the lowest in NASCAR history. Nobody is going to average an 11.1 average finish in the rest of the history of NASCAR, because it is way more competitive now, and it'll only continue to get more competitive, especially since the next gen car just came out, and there are 25 drivers in the field that can win a race in the next gen car nowadays. Another thing I want to mention with Jimmie before I end the video is Jimmie did not have any crazy like run-ins with any drivers. Like, he wasn't beefing with people. Dale was wrecking people to win. Jimmie was not wrecking people to win his races. And Jimmie still has more wins than Dale in a harder era, in tougher competition, in a harder playoff system. Jimmie was winning more championships and more wins than Dale was, and Gordon. So now that I've given you guys why I think Jimmie Johnson is the GOAT, leave in the comments why you think Jeff Gordon's the GOAT, why you think Dale Earnhardt's the GOAT, why do you even think Richard Petty's the GOAT, or maybe say in the comments why you think Jimmie's the GOAT. If you have Jimmie as your greatest NASCAR Cup Series driver of all time, let me know why. Let me know what you like about Jimmie. Let me know what you like about Jeff in these arguments. And also, I'm thinking about doing a top 10 NASCAR Cup Series drivers of all time list. Let me know if you guys want to see that in the comment section down below. And yeah, see you guys later. Peace.
Outside, just like in Atlanta.